Welcome back, everybody, and this is our very last chapter of Fever 1793. I hope you've loved this book as much as I do. I know that it's kind of deep sometimes and sad, but I feel like there's a lot of good here, and there's a lot that we can learn about people and overcoming obstacles and being strong and courageous and sometimes having to step out of your comfort zone to do the things that are necessary. Those are the takeaways from this book. So we'll finish this off, and then I want to talk a little bit about what parts of this book were true and what parts were fiction. So Epilogue, December 11th. So about a month has passed. December 11th, 1793. I opened one eye. A scratching noise in the corner of the room had woken me. The scrambling feet of a desperate mouse about to become breakfast for a lumpy orange cat. I winced as Silas pounced. The squeaking stopped. I rolled over to look out the window. It was dark still. The faint call of a watchman could be heard down 7th Street, and a few stars still hung in the sky. I burrowed beneath the warm weight of my quilt. My toes curled at the thought of crossing the icy floorboards on a dark December morning. Nothing gained by delay, I thought. No one else was going to get the house stirring. I snatched my stockings off the stool next to my bed and pulled them on under the covers, taking care not to disturb Nell, who slept beside me. Thank goodness she had learned not to wet the bed before the weather turned cold. I tucked the quilt around her and stood up, quickly changing into my clean day shift. I stepped into my woolen overskirts, laced my stays, and wrapped a heavy shawl over my bodice. Mother rolled over and snored quietly. She had coughed late into the night. It was good for her to sleep peacefully. I nudged Silas with my toe. The cat daintily picked up his breakfast and made for the stairs. I crossed the hall to the other bedchamber. Eliza stirred in her sleep, mumbling about ginger and nutmeg. Robert and William slept soundly, their arms wrapped around each other in their trundle bed, their chests rising and falling in unison. I crept down the stairs, careful to skip the squeaky ones. I dug out the embers of the ashes of the kitchen fireplace and laid tinder on them. The dry wood caught quickly, and the flames soon warmed my face and hands. I swung the kettle over the flames and looked into the fire while the water heated. Eliza would want to send the twins to fetch the day's newspapers. Mother would fuss, of course. She didn't think they were old enough to do anything besides raise a ruckus in the garden. The sooner we could afford a pony and cart, the better. That way, Mother could run errands together with the boys, and Eliza and I could get some work done in peace. It would be nice to finish putting by the mincemeat before the snow came for good. Nell still refused to leave my side, but I didn't mind. The water finally boiled. I made a coffee for myself, a mug for Eliza, and one for Mother. I cut a lump of sugar off the loaf and added it, along with a healthy dollop of milk, to my mug. Being the first one awake did bring some privileges, I thought with a smile. Overhead, footsteps crossed the room. I hurried to set out the breakfast dishes before Eliza came downstairs. She didn't begrudge me a few minutes of quiet, but the table setting came first. When the crockery was laid out, I carried my mug through the front room, past the polished tables and backgammon boards, past the beautiful new painting of a meadow full of flowers. I backed up to adjust the painting so it hung nice and straight. Nathaniel was coming along nicely, Mr. Peel said. 3 years, maybe 4, and he would be able to support himself. That wasn't long to wait. I opened the front door and sat on the step facing High Street. A lamplighter some blocks down reached up with his long pole to extinguish the street lamp. To the east, beyond the river, the stars faded before the promise of a new day. These solitary minutes each morning were fast becoming a habit. A good habit, but one that I would soon need a woolen cloak to enjoy. The sky brightened to a dull bronze glow as the last of the season's geese rushed southward, flying so low I could hear the beat of their wings against the morning air. I drained the mug reluctantly and scraped my finger along the bottom to get the last of the undissolved sugar. Looking down the peaceful street, it seemed no one could imagine the terror we had all endured. There were many tables with empty places, or invalids who had once been as strong as horses. But the sun continued to rise. People filled the street each day. On Sunday, the church bells rang. Philadelphia had moved on. Early morning was the only time I felt as if there were ghosts nearby. Memories of the weeks of fear. That's when I found myself listening for Polly's giggle or grandfather's voice. Sometimes they felt so close. Close enough to tell me I should stop dawdling and get to work. I smiled as the mist faded. The yellow sun rose, a giant balloon filled with prayers and hopes and promise. I stood and shook the idleness out of my skirts. Day was begun. And that's the end. I hope you love the story. I want you to notice that chapter sounded a lot like the first chapter, didn't it? But their roles were reversed. It was up to her to get up and start the day while Mother slept on. At the very end of this book, and I'm sad that so many of you don't have a copy of it, but there's a really great appendix at the end of this book. I know that's backward for you, but it goes through what parts of this book were real and what parts were made up. So much of it is real. So much of the background, the foundation of the story was historical, and that's one of the main reasons I like doing it. Did this epidemic really happen? Yes, it says absolutely. It was one of the worst epidemics in United States history up to that point. In 3 months, it killed nearly 5,000 people, 10% of the city's population. That doesn't sound like a lot of people, but considering the amount of people that lived at that time, that number is huge. Battle of the Doctors. There was 2 different fields of thought when it came to the fever. Dr. Rush, who was an important gentleman at this time, was the one that felt that bleeding the patient was better. But then there was also a different side of that with some French doctors that felt that was not the correct cure. And so there was an actual battle between those 2 different sides of the story. And then it just goes a little bit into the different aspects of the book. Several times in the book, she references the hot air balloon that Mr. Blanchard flew. That was an actual event. First hot air balloon ever flown happened in January of that year in Philadelphia. So she talks a little bit about having attended that with Nathaniel, remember? That really did happen. It talks a little bit about the fact that most of the fever victims are actually buried in one location in Philadelphia called the Potter's Field. It's very similar to, or very close to, where they originally had the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, which was from the Revolutionary War. So that is still there in Philadelphia that you can go see. I'm sure they've placed a monument or something there now. The Peel family that Nathaniel worked for was an actual family of artists. They were kind of eccentric, which means, a little bit strange and different. They actually did exist, and they were actually artists. The Free African Society we talked about was an actual society. Reverend Richard Allen, had that up, and it was a group of free African American people from Philadelphia that started a group that sole purpose was to do good things for the city of Philadelphia, to show people that Black people are valuable and do have good things to offer. And it just kind of goes into some different things, different famous people, how they were affected by the fever. And at the very end, it says yellow fever today. It says yellow fever still exists, but not in the United States. So that's good. In 1902, Dr. Walter Reed discovered that the female blah, blah, blah mosquito spreads the disease. So they didn't know that at the time. We do now. And in the 1930s, they developed a vaccine for that. It says, but yellow fever still kills thousands of people a year in some other parts of the country, such as some of the Saharan desert areas of Africa and some parts of South America. So very interesting. Lots of good information in there, but I hope that you've liked this book. I think it's so fitting for what we're going through right now. I want you to think about how it compares, how what they went through compares with what we're going through right now with the coronavirus epidemic that we're going through. What ours is called, though, is a pandemic, because it's not just affecting this country or this area. It's affecting countries all over the world, which is pretty amazing. We've had a lot more instances of coronavirus than they've had of yellow fever. But again, the population now is so much larger than then. And our medical practices are so much different than back then. Back then, if you got yellow fever, there wasn't a lot they could do for you. It was pretty much a death sentence for most people. To survive it was much less likely than it was to die from it. That is not the case, luckily for us now. With COVID, we have the technology to treat that, and the prospects are much better. So one thing's for certain, we'll never forget this period of our lives, will we? It's been strange but fun to read to you on YouTube. I would love to hear from you. So when you finish this book, please shoot me an email. Let your mom and dad help you get on Facebook Messenger and message me. Let me know what you thought of it. Did you like it? Did you not? What did you think of it? So I miss you guys, and I'll talk to you soon.